Let me start by congratulating Ninka and her team on this landmark contribution to our understanding of African agricultural R&D. I think it's a great report. There's a great data set behind that. It's really sets, by all measures, coverage, detail, credibility, accuracy. This measurement effort sets a new quality standard. For the first time, we can say that we have meaningful time series data on the agricultural R&D enterprise in sub-Saharan Africa. A number of important new issues have been brought to light by Ninka and her team, and potential to understand the political economy of R&D in Africa has been greatly expanded. Even more exciting is that ASTI's achievement that are highlighted today are one milestone along the way to finding solutions to lagging agricultural productivity in Africa. I look for the December IFPRI conference to harvest the benefits of some of this data. I haven't heard that mentioned yet today, but I hope people will be advised of this conference that's coming up in December. I look forward to the next evolution of the ASTI enterprise, which is to start monitoring R&D investments in real time, that we won't have to have 10-year snapshots so that we can look backwards 10 years and see what's been happening, but that we can anticipate what is happening in real time. This is something that's underway and I think will be a real step forward. Let me also pause to acknowledge the great leadership and strong support that the IFPRI has provided from Mark and Schengen. They've been strong supporters of ASTI, and they've done a very good job there. I was asked to make a couple of minutes to make observations, so I won't get in the way of the more important questions from the audience. I didn't see Ninka's presentation until this morning, so I didn't just copy her conclusions, but mine are essentially the same. I have 4 points that I want to make. The first, of course, is the small country challenge. That comes out very clearly in the report. The 32 countries represent tremendous diversity in experience and prospects. About a third of the countries have less than 100 agricultural researchers, and of those, most of them don't have PhD or graduate training. Some of these countries have a dozen or 2 dozen PhD-trained agricultural researchers to manage complex agricultural systems. 2/3 of the countries have less than 200 researchers. That's about the size of a large land-grant university in the United States. That is staffed completely by PhD-trained scientists. It's striking that it's true that sub-Saharan Africa achieved its highest annual investment growth rate ever during the 2001 to 2008 period. It saw an increase of more than $300 million in annual expenditures, but we have to take this, put this in perspective. This increase in R&D investment leaves the intensity ratio of 0.61% of ag GDP, the same as it was in 1975. And the $300 million increase was largely accounted for by just 5 countries. And even of those winners, if you will, you can look to the case of Nigeria, which had the largest increase in funding. And at the end of that increase in funding, they have a lower percentage of PhD-trained scientists than they did before that funding increase occurred. The absorptive capacity, the toll that this instability of funding takes on agricultural research enterprise is quite striking. This problem of instability emerges quite clearly in the report. Annual funding variability is higher in sub-Saharan Africa than in any other region of the world. As Ninka and Phil Pardee have pointed out, agricultural innovation is slow magic, requiring 20 to 30 years of cumulative progress. It's difficult to attract and retain top scientists and to keep their research programs on track if you can't predict next year's budget. Gene, you've managed research systems before. If you don't know next year's budget, you cannot have effective research programs. I don't like the term donor dependency, and I hope that we'll soon enter an era in which that term is obsolete, but it applies. We need to make better use of traditional funding modalities and explore innovative approaches to supporting R&D at the national level. The CGR Fund Council is meeting this week to discuss its reform. Our funding, the next reform that's needed, as soon as we've digested this one, Mark, is to take on reform of the funding of NARS from the donor perspective. These issues are just as serious as the CGIR funding reforms. The next point is about the human capital deficit. It's quite striking. India and sub-Saharan Africa have about the same total number of agricultural researchers. In fact, India has about 8% more researchers than all of sub-Saharan Africa. But there's a gap of more than 5,000 India has 5,000 more PhD-trained researchers than Sub-Saharan Africa. That's a huge gap to be filled, and it's been widening over the last decade. The share of researchers with PhD training in Sub-Saharan Africa has not increased since 2000. The magnitude of this opportunity is increased by the evidence of the increasing average age of African scientists. As most of us in this room know firsthand, graduate scientific training is a slow and expensive process. Africa's needs are urgent, and donors can be an important part of training this generation of African scientists, just as they have been in past decades in Asia and Latin America, but will require a very firm commitment on the part of national governments. Then finally, none of these are new problems. What is new is that the ASTI data bring these problems to light with a clarity that has been lacking up to now. We can't just assume that it'll go away. The ASTI data show that these are persistent problems that have existed over a couple of decades. They show we know which countries are struggling, which are doing relatively well. We can measure the magnitude of the funding variability problem. We can measure the size of the human capital deficit and calculate the cost of bringing Sub-Saharan Africa human capital up to international standards, thanks to the ASTI data effort. The other thing that is new, to leave on a somewhat more hopeful note, is a point that Jean brought up. There is new institutional infrastructure that hasn't existed in the past. It's much richer than it has been in past decades. The maturation of the supranational organizations such as IFPRI, ASARECA, CORAF, and CARDESA present new opportunities for addressing funding stability and perhaps the small country problem as well. But we should recognize immediately that these are also dependent on donor funding and subject to the same struggle to maintain funding stability as are the national programs. The CADP presents a new world of opportunity for improving the partnership between donors and governments. CADP targets and aims are clear. 6% growth of agricultural GDP. You cannot achieve 6% growth of agricultural GDP without something like a 3.5% or 4% rate of productivity improvement. We all know the key to productivity improvement is to invest smartly in agricultural R&D. Let me say then finally that what we see today is that ag research systems in Africa are small, underfunded, staffed by poorly trained scientists. That doesn't comprise a modern agricultural research enterprise that will be needed for the coming decades. We can all be part of that effort. I thank IFPRI and ASTI for bringing this important task to light. And I thank IFPRI again for the opportunity to offer my thoughts. So thank you.